Hi, I'm Tucker. Welcome to Last Moments. Some deaths are just tragic, but others are so embarrassingly dumb they'll make you cover your face in shame. From a gambler who climbed into a tiger cage to avoid zoo gate fees to a military junk collector who welded a live grenade onto a DIY medieval flail, permanently clearing out his collection. It was on the 20th of July, 2017 in Sichuan province, China. The summer heat hung over the city, and posters advertising the zoo's new Bengal tiger covered the streets. Mr. Zhang Weihao, 37 years old, worked long shifts at a small manufacturing plant outside the city and rarely spent money on himself. But when the zoo began advertising its new Bengal tiger exhibit, he became fixated on seeing it in person. He had never seen a Bengal tiger up close before, and over the following weeks, he planned the visit carefully, even booking a day off work more than a week in advance. I am amazed at how a simple public attraction can take on personal significance to the extent of influencing decisions weeks in advance. He saved money carefully, enough for transport, food, and admission. But Zhang had a gambling habit, and in the days leading up to the visit, he kept dipping into the savings, small bets that felt harmless, and then larger ones to recover what he had lost. And by the morning of his scheduled day off, most of the admission money was gone, but he went anyway. He told himself he would find a way, and he traveled to the zoo and stood outside the entrance and checked his pockets and knew, with a sinking certainty, that he did not have enough to get in. I have stood outside things I could not afford to enter. Most people have, and I understand the particular sting of it when you have been looking forward to something for weeks. What I cannot follow, and what I suspect most people cannot follow either, is what happened next. Most people would have gone home, but Zhang had spent weeks thinking about this day, and he was not ready to give it up, so he began walking the perimeter fence, slowly and deliberately, looking for a way inside that would not require a ticket. Warning signs were fixed to the fencing at regular intervals. Danger, predatory animals, authorized personnel only, do not climb. And a maintenance worker who spotted him testing the fence sections told him directly that the area beyond the barrier connected to the animal containment zones. I want to be fair about that exchange. The worker did not gesture vaguely at a sign. He told Zhang directly, in plain terms, what was on the other side of the fence. Zhang heard it, processed it, and kept walking. That is the part I find genuinely difficult to move past. Zhang ignored him and kept walking. He found a rear section of fencing that felt less visible from the main pathways, and he decided this was the place, and he began to climb. The fence was taller than he had expected and curved outward at the top, and security footage later showed him struggling several times before finally pulling himself onto the upper rail, breathing hard, looking down at the other side. That is the moment I would want to reach back and say something, because sometimes a person needs to hear a warning one more time from somewhere inside themselves before it is too late. He had assumed there would be a service walkway below, flat ground, somewhere to land and catch his breath. But there was no walkway, only the enclosed interior safety zone of the Bengal tiger habitat. And before he could process what he was seeing, his grip gave way, and he fell. The drop stunned him on impact. 3 tigers that had been resting nearby reacted instantly to the noise and sudden movement. At first, the visitors watching thought the fall was part of a show until the tigers began attacking Zhang. Zoo staff had attempted to distract the animals using noise devices and feeding lures, while the surrounding viewing platforms were evacuated. But the response window was extremely short, and the enclosure had been engineered specifically to prevent any escape from within once entry had occurred. By the time emergency responders were able to disperse the tigers, he was already dead. Investigators confirmed the enclosure had functioned exactly as designed. The fencing, the warning signs, and the perimeter barriers all met local safety requirements, and no evidence of structural failure or staff negligence was found. The death was classified as an accidental fatality, caused by unauthorized entry into a secured predator enclosure. The tigers were not euthanized, as the animals had behaved naturally within their own habitat. The zoo temporarily closed the tiger exhibit for inspection and later added anti-climb modifications to several rear perimeter sections to avoid another animal containment breach. Seems like people go looking for death, because while Mr. Zhang walked into his death with his both legs, our next case created his with his both hands. On the 13th of August 2016, on the outskirts of Belgrade, Serbia, the air was dry and dusty, and beyond the last residential streets lay wide dumping grounds filled with old rusting debris. Marko Petrovic, 29 years old, had a problem not many people could relate to. He could never walk past something interesting. And to Marco, almost everything was interesting. His garage was less a workshop and more a private museum. Old rifle parts hung on the walls. Corroded shell casings lined the shelves. Decommissioned military hardware sat in careful rows across every available surface. And visitors who did not know him often stopped in the doorway and stared. He collected these things the way other people collect stamps or coins, with real excitement and a love of history. And these dumping grounds were, to him, the best places in the world to search. Forgotten spots where the leftover pieces of old wars hid in layers of industrial waste. His friends warned him regularly, told him that not everything old was safe, that corroded did not mean inert, but Marco had handled hundreds of old military items over the years, and nothing had ever happened, and that record of safety had become, in his mind, a kind of proof. I want to be fair to Marco here. Hundreds of items over how many years, and not one incident. I genuinely cannot fault the logic entirely. That kind of track record would make most people feel exactly the same way. The problem is that the one item where that logic fails you is also the last item you ever pick up. That afternoon, he was moving through a mixed debris pile when he uncovered a heavily rusted object and recognized it immediately. A hand grenade, older surplus stock, its casing thick with corrosion and pitted from years of exposure. He did not panic. He did not call the authorities. He picked it up. He had been thinking for a while about building a medieval flail, a decorative piece with a rounded head welded to a chain and fitted to a handle. The grenade, small and solid and pleasingly heavy in his hand, seemed to him like the perfect centerpiece for it. He carried it back to his car and drove home. In the garage, he secured the grenade in a bench vise, examined it carefully, and marked the spot on the casing where he intended to weld a fixing loop so the finished head could hang cleanly from its chain. He lit the welding torch and began applying heat directly to the corroded exterior at the marked point, working slowly and deliberately, the way a craftsman works when he is building something he cares about. There is something about that image I find hard to shake. The slow, deliberate approach of a craftsman who took pride in his work. He was not being reckless in the way he understood recklessness. Unfortunately, he was crafting with the wrong material. What the years of surface corrosion concealed entirely was that the explosive filler and fuse assembly inside had not been neutralized by time, only made unpredictable, and sustained heat was precisely the kind of stress they could not absorb. There was a delay, brief and deceptive, and then the grenade fragmented at the workbench with catastrophic force. The blast struck him at point-blank range, and the injuries were fatal. Hot fragments and burning debris ignited the cleaning chemicals and combustible materials around him, and a secondary fire moved quickly through the garage, consuming the work surfaces, stored tools, and the carefully arranged collection that had taken him years to build. Emergency responders secured the property and established a temporary safety perimeter around adjacent properties, and a regional explosive ordnance disposal unit confirmed the remnants were consistent with a single older military hand grenade. No other devices were found, and the incident was classified as isolated. Warning signs went up near known dumping grounds in the district. Reporting procedures at local scrapyards were reinforced, and short safety briefings were arranged for collectors and salvage workers in the area. Marco died while working, but the person in the next case died while having what was supposed to be fun. It was on the 11th of January. The alpine resort of Val Thorens in France sat still under a cold night, its lower slopes closed for grooming, its service running empty and glazed with ice prepared overnight for the following morning. Marcus Hale was 38 years old, a sales manager from Bristol, who had spent most of his adult life being the reliable and sensible one, the kind of man who arrived on time, read the small print, and quietly talked his friends out of bad ideas before they went too far. He had a wife, 2 teenage daughters, and a mortgage he was quietly proud of nearly paying off. On the mountain, that reliability had a different name. Among his friends, Marcus had been the cautious one for as long as anyone could remember, the man who gripped the ski lift too tightly, who backed out of steep descents while the others went ahead, teased year after year for being the least daring person on the slope. By 2011, he had decided that reputation needed to end. He had come to Val Thorens with 4 old friends for a reunion holiday. the kind of trip built more around drinking and old stories than actual skiing. He spent the whole trip volunteering for harder runs, skiing aggressively after drinking, and insisting loudly that the nervousness was behind him. His friends were impressed, and the alcohol made everything feel more convincing than it was. Late that evening, the group wandered toward a closed service run, where maintenance crews had left a thick vinyl crash cushion beside the slope, the kind normally strapped around snowmaking machinery to absorb impact. Someone joked about using it as a toboggan. Marcus volunteered before the laughter had finished. They dragged it uphill through the packed snow, nobody stopping to think about why the cushion existed. Marcus positioned himself on the smooth vinyl surface, and his friends pushed him into the dark. The cushion moved slowly at first, then hit the icy, groomed stretch and accelerated violently. He tried digging his boots in but could not slow down. At the bottom sat the snowmaking unit, its steel framework now completely exposed. The same machinery the cushion had been protecting. The cushion slammed into the steel framework, and the impact threw Marcus forward directly into the exposed metal, the collision causing catastrophic trauma to his chest and upper body. Ski patrol arrived within minutes, but Marcus went into cardiac arrest on the slope and could not be revived. French authorities questioned the group separately to piece together what happened. No intent to harm was found, but investigators concluded that the group's collective behavior, hours of drinking, entering a restricted area, removing protective equipment, and encouraging the stunt, had directly contributed to his death. No homicide charges were filed, but financial penalties were imposed for trespassing and tampering with safety equipment. Resort officials afterward inspected and added locking straps to crash cushions across several slopes, and authorities increased late-night patrols around closed service runs. The man involved in the next case actually knew the right answer. He was told it clearly, and he acknowledged it. He just decided that knowing was enough, and doing it himself was just as good. Turns out it wasn't. It was on the 3rd of May, 2014. A dry basin land stretched for miles outside the isolated mining community in Nevada, bordered by abandoned prospecting routes, collapsed sheds, and remnants of old mineral exploration sites that nobody had touched in decades. Dale Rawlings was 61 years old, a cattle rancher who had worked that land most of his life, and the people living in the community knew him as a man who handled his own problems and trusted almost nobody else to do it for him. I have met men like Dale, not personally but through stories like this one, men who have handled enough hard things in their lives that the idea of asking for help starts to feel like a kind of failure. It is an admirable quality, right up until it is not. While clearing debris from a partially collapsed shed near the edge of his property, Dale pulled back a tarp covering a pile of rusted scrap and found several old wooden crates underneath. Inside were deteriorating commercial blasting materials, explosive sticks, corroded detonator caps, and brittle coils of blasting fuse, all left behind from mining operations that had ended long ago. The wrapping on the explosives showed dark, oily staining and crystal-like residue along the seams, both recognized signs that the materials had broken down chemically and become dangerously unstable. And Dale understood immediately that what he was looking at was serious. That evening, Dale called a longtime friend and described what he had found. His friend urged him clearly and repeatedly to contact the authorities and leave everything exactly where it was. Dale refused, arguing the explosives were on his land, that involving authorities would cause legal and financial problems he did not want, and that he had already worked out a safe way to destroy the material himself. The following afternoon, he loaded the deteriorating explosives into the bucket of an old farm tractor and drove out to an isolated wash bordered by volcanic rock and desert brush, dumping everything into a shallow depression, believing the surrounding terrain would absorb the blast. He then climbed to a firing position roughly 50 to 60 yards away and prepared to detonate the explosives with a scoped hunting rifle. What Dale had not accounted for was how an explosion tears through everything around it, sending rock, metal, and fragments outward at enormous speed in directions impossible to predict. A fragment traveled back up toward the ridgeline and struck him in the upper neck, causing catastrophic injury and rapid blood loss. He collapsed near the firing position and lay there alone for hours, 50 to 60 yards. I looked that up once just to picture it. It is not a small distance on flat open ground. But an explosion does not care about flat open ground, and it does not negotiate with the terrain around it. Dale had thought about distance. He had not thought about physics. The ranch was isolated, and Dale had been working alone. Hours later, a neighboring property owner noticed his tractor still idling near the wash after dark, drove over to investigate, and found Dale severely injured on the hillside. Dale Rawlings was airlifted to hospital, but did not survive. Bomb disposal teams later recovered additional deteriorating blasting material still inside the shed and carried out controlled disposal operations across the property, doing exactly what Dale had been urged to do from the very beginning. The explosives had stayed buried and undisturbed in that Nevada desert for decades, and they only became lethal after someone decided that confidence was a substitute for expertise. While Dale found the cause of his death on his own property, these next guys drove across town just to cause their own death. It was on the 24th of May, 2014. The night air was dry and still in the northern Arizona desert, and out along the empty highway near a partially demolished overpass outside a rural desert town sat dark and silent, its missing center span open to nothing but air, temporary barriers glowing faintly under construction lamps, the site closed and waiting. Wade Parker was 32 years, and his friend Cody McCall was 28, and both of them had grown up loving speed and risk, spending weekends pushing cars across dry washes and rough desert cuts, clearing small gaps and drops on private land, building a confidence between them that had grown slowly and quietly into something dangerous, a belief that momentum could solve almost any problem a road could throw at them. They had seen gap jumps in films, cars flying across broken bridges and crumbling highways, landing clean on the other side, and over time that image had stopped feeling like fantasy and started feeling like something real, something reachable. If you just had enough speed and enough nerve. I understand that feeling, I think. The way a thing you have watched enough times starts to feel possible. What I find harder to understand is the point where possible and certain stopped being different things in their minds. That night, the pair arrived at a partially demolished overpass outside a rural desert town with a wide gap between two elevated spans. The site was closed off with signs, barriers, and a chain gate, though part of the perimeter had been left open earlier that week. Portable floodlights lit the ramp unevenly, leaving the gap in shadow. Wade climbed out and walked to the edge, looking across at the far concrete wall and measuring the gap with his eyes. When he came back, they said what they needed to say, and Cody reversed further down the ramp to give himself a longer run. He accelerated hard, the engine loud in the desert quiet, and at the top, the wheels left the road and the car was airborne. I keep returning moments like these. Wade walked to the edge, looked across, measured with his eyes. Not instruments, just his eyes in uneven light, over a gap that had been engineered to stop traffic. I wonder what he saw when he looked. For a moment, everything felt exactly as they had imagined, but the arc was too shallow and the distance too great, and the front of the car slammed into the concrete wall just below road level. The impact folded the front end completely before coming to rest at the base of the embankment below. A utility contractor passing on a nearby road spotted the debris and called emergency services. The site was unstable and elevated, and rescue teams had to carefully stabilize the ground around the wreckage before anyone could get close enough to reach the car. Both Wade and Cody died at the scene, taken by the force of an impact that left no margin for survival. Investigators later modeled the trajectory and concluded that the pair had attempted a stunt highly unrealistic, and that the pair had crossed into the site through a section of perimeter fencing that had been left partially open during the week for equipment access. The State Transportation Authority reviewed its construction site safety guidance after the incident, recommending stronger perimeter controls and better lighting at incomplete structures, though changes were applied gradually across different sites rather than all at once. Every case in this collection has a moment where things could have gone differently. For Parker and McCall, it was the moment they crossed into that construction site. In the next case, it was a friend warning him over and over, but he decided the warning did not apply to him. It was the 13th of June, 2015, Clearwater Junction, Ohio. The night air was cool and sharp as two men worked under the pale yellow glow of a storage yard's overhead lighting, unloading gear from a pickup truck after a long weekend at a regional reptile expo. Evan Kessler was 35 years old, stocky and broad across the shoulders, the kind of man who filled a room without trying and who had spent most of his adult life working warehouse logistics across a string of distribution centers in central Ohio, hauling freight, managing loading bays, and generally doing the kind of physical work that made him feel capable and in control of most situations he walked into. He had grown up in Clearwater Junction, never moved far, and still spent most of his weekends around a handful of exotic animal collectors, which was how he had ended up friends with Mark in the first place. His friend Mark ran a licensed exotic reptile handling business, traveling across Midwest expos under permit, and his collection included several venomous species transported inside professional double-latched crates specifically designed for that purpose. Double-latched. Professionally designed. I have seen enough of these stories to know that when someone goes out of their way to build a crate that says "do not touch this," they mean it. One of the crates held a juvenile cobra, secured and padded in the truck bed alongside other equipment. The plan for the evening was simple: unload everything into the storage yard and go home. Evan was there to help carry the non-hazardous gear. When he reached into the truck bed, he found an equipment bag wedged beneath the cobra's crate, and rather than waiting for Mark, he decided to lift the crate slightly to free it. Mark told him sharply to put it down, that the crate held a venomous cobra and needed to be handled only by him under controlled conditions. Evan set the crate down, but kept one hand on the lid to steady it. As he shifted his grip, the top panel flexed slightly, opening a small gap along the front edge where the latch had not fully engaged. The cobra struck upward through that gap and caught Evan across the fingers before he pulled his hand back. Mark told him immediately that they needed to go to a hospital. Evan looked at his hand, flexed his fingers, and said it was fine. He was standing, thinking clearly, and nothing felt seriously wrong. So instead of the hospital, the two ended up at a nearby diner. What Evan did not know was that neurotoxic venom can be deceptively quiet in its early stages, working silently at a neurological level long before the body makes it obvious. Inside the diner, Evan ordered food, showed the bite marks to a couple of truck drivers at the counter, and laughed it off. But within 30 minutes, his eyelids had grown heavy and his words were coming out slower and thicker than normal. Small enough changes that he dismissed them. I find this part the hardest to sit with, not because of what the venom was doing, but because every person in that diner, Evan included, had a window to act and none of them walked through it. Mark did not dismiss them, and told Evan plainly that the venom was beginning to affect his nervous system and that they needed to leave immediately. Evan said he just needed another few minutes. He did not improve. His coordination deteriorated, his breathing slowed, and when he tried to stand, he could not do it steadily. Diner staff recognized something was seriously wrong and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived and began respiratory support, but the venom had been working untreated for close to 2 hours by then. Evan could not be stabilized and was pronounced dead that night. Clinicians later noted that the time spent at the diner had pushed him past the point where treatment could have saved him. He believed the snake needed to look dangerous before it could actually be dangerous, and that belief cost him the only time that ever mattered. Evan Kessler had 2 hours to change the outcome, and he spent them at a bar. The next case does not involve that kind of window. It involves a single misstep and the few seconds between a man losing his footing and everything that followed. It was on the 18th of August, 2017, at Lake Washington, Washington State. The afternoon light sat low across the water, warm and unhurried, the kind of summer day that felt too easy to rush. The surface was calm, no hazards reported, nothing to suggest the day would end any way other than ordinarily. Rodney Brown, 32 years, had been here before, many times. This exact lake, this exact routine. Solo jet ski rides were his way of stepping away from everything else, a structured kind of quiet he had built into his week without fanfare or explanation. He favored long looping routes away from the busier shoreline areas, repetitive and familiar, the kind of riding that required just enough concentration to clear the mind without demanding anything more. The ride that afternoon followed his usual pattern, steady and uneventful right through to the later stages, when a battery warning light began flashing on the display panel. It came and went at first, easy to brush off, the kind of minor electrical signal that riders often put down to normal wear, rather than something that needed immediate attention. As the ride continued and the return phase began, the alert became persistent, no longer flickering but holding steady, a clear signal that something was wrong in the system. Rodney interpreted it as degradation rather than failure, a reasonable assumption in isolation, though one that would shape every decision that followed. He brought the jet ski in toward a dock area he used occasionally for maintenance access, quieter than the main marina, lower in foot traffic, the kind of spot that suited informal work without drawing much attention. The dock surface was wet, uneven in places, the natural result of a day spent around water, not unusual, not alarming under ordinary conditions. At this point, things took a turn. Rather than waiting for a proper check or asking for help from the marina, Rodney decided to restore power himself using a makeshift electrical connection, equipment that was never designed for use around water, brought into a setting where water, conductive surfaces, and live current All shared the same tight space with nothing separating them. He was crouched at the dock edge, adjusting cables, repositioning the connection. Those four things together were what I could not stop thinking about. Water, surfaces that carry electricity, live wires and equipment not meant to be near the sea. All of them at once, in that order, in that same place. There is no room for anything to go wrong, and Rodney was kneeling at the edge of all of it, on a wet, slippery dock, with no one beside him. When his footing shifted on the wet surface beneath him, after he fell into the water, the situation changed very quickly. The electrical current and the surrounding water combined to deliver a sudden shock that left Rodney unable to control his body. He went under almost immediately and did not resurface. Unable to swim or push himself up, he remained trapped beneath the surface until he stopped breathing. People nearby quickly noticed something was wrong, and emergency services were called. Rescue teams entered the water and located his body near the dock structure shortly after. He was confirmed deceased at the scene, with drowning recorded as the cause of death and electrical incapacitation noted as a contributing factor. Authorities later issued safety warnings about using non-marine electrical equipment near water and inspected the dock for hazards.